This Guitar Interactive magazine feature is brought to you by Ernie Ball Strings. For more information, visit ernieball.com.
So hi guys, Jonathan Graham here for Guitar Interactive Magazine. We are here with the one and only Joe Bonamassa. How are you?
There's one and only, and thank the Lord for that. I don't think the guitar community could take two of me.
Well, I don't know if there's enough guitars going around for two Joe Bonamassas.
Yeah, or whatever, opinions on things that are somewhat, diametrically opposed to other people's logic. But yes, I'm happy to be here in Brighton.
Of
we
course.
Like Brighton.
Well, anytime I speak with you, Joe, you seem to be quite close to water. We're either on a cruise ship or right by the coast.
Oh yeah, that's I'm a beachcomber by nature. It's Brighton's always been good to us. We've been playing here for years, and we're in. This is the part one of a very long run over here that will see everything from a regular 7-piece show to the reunion of Black Country Communion in tour form, that's been something we haven't done in 15 years, 14, but who's counting? An orchestra show and a tribute to Rory Gallagher.
Amazing.
And all of that's happening in the next 90 days.
I did notice that when I was looking at the schedule. I was thinking he's always a busy man, but this is particularly busy. I mean, is that by design? Is that one of these ones just to keep it at this stage? You've done so much in your career. Is it to kind of keep it interesting, where you go, right, I want to really fill the calendar with some interesting shows?
No, I mean, obviously anytime we have the opportunity to do like Montreux Jazz Fest and North Sea and all those really cool things we've done for the last 20 years. Those are always, we always really, jump at the opportunity. But, the Rory Gallagher thing was something that Donald and Daniel and Peter Aiken came up with, and they pitched us about a year ago. And, hey, would you be interested in doing something for the 30th anniversary of Rory's passing? And I said, yes, absolutely. And then I thought about it. I'm like, oh, my God, this is going to be a lot harder than I thought. But it's going to be really fun and something completely different than I'm normally doing. I haven't played that kind of full out sonic attack since I've been very young.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a challenge because that's just a different way of approaching things, and as my band has grown in size, you have to leave space for other things. This is 4-piece full out, and I have to get my head around that. And the fact that Black Country Communion is playing a month worth of shows before we get to the Rory Gallagher stuff is going to be good, because I'm used to kind of like covering more of that, like sonically the guitar, where I'm just playing a lot more rhythm and a lot more full out,
Of course.
And it's going to be great. I'm it's important to know I'm not Rory, I influenced by him, but I'm not him. And what I'm going to do is just do my version of his songs in the best possible way that we can. And they're not going to be sound-alikes, because if you want a sound-alike, then just put Irish Tour 74 on. You already have it.
Do you find, like, at this stage, especially with social media and what have you, you almost kind of need to preempt things like that? Joe Satriani's kind of done the same with stepping in with Sammy Hagar, with the Van Halen stuff. He's kind of going, I'm not Ed, like, don't expect it's a copycat.
No, I don't feel the need to preempt anything anymore. Is because all it takes is just a deep breath and a little bit of critical thinking, in the sense that it's Joe stepped into a situation that they're playing Van Halen songs with Sammy Hagar and Michael Anthony, and at one point my bandmate Jason Bonham, and now it's Kenny Aronoff, and you are in the kill zone, because Van Halen's playing meant so much to so many, including me, that there's nothing that Joe's going to do to mitigate someone saying, well, it's not the way Eddie would have played. I'm like, no, it's the way Joe Satriani, who's a bona fide legend of guitar, it's the way he plays it. And we have to get our head around a couple of things, that all of this is tactile. You know, I mean, I've covered everyone from Clapton to Led Zeppelin to Gary Moore, and it all spits out the way I would play it, not the way they would play it, because I'm not those kind of players. You know, you're influenced by those people, and it would be really, in some way, shape, and form, kind of strange if I just did complete carbon copies of whoever. And it's the same for anyone who tackles an icon and goes out there and says, hey, you know, listen, you know, you're not saying that, you know, you're doing this better. You're just saying you're doing it. Yeah. And if you do it with the right intentions, of paying tribute to someone who's not here anymore, and you do it with the right attitude, and be like, hey, listen, you know, I'm not advertising this as close your eyes and, you know, it's going to sound exactly like Rory. It's going to be me interpreting those songs, you know, in tribute to someone who meant a lot to a lot of people. And I was just honored to have someone ask. As far as the internet's concerned, I don't care anymore, because the ones who shout the loudest don't get the call. They didn't call you, they called me. So when they call you, don't be surprised if somebody like me says you don't sound like them. Yeah. It's like, if you want to get involved, then you gotta, you know, you take the good with the bad.
Absolutely. It's going to be incredible.
Yeah, it'll be fine. It'll be what it is. And, you know, I'm looking forward to it. And we're revisiting the orchestra this summer in Holland. You know, the Dutch National Orchestra is doing, we're gonna do pretty much a recreation of our Hollywood Bowl show. Now that will sound, hopefully, exactly like the Hollywood Bowl, because we did it already. That was our version. Those were our songs, and we did it at the Hollywood Bowl. So that would be a lot easier to reinterpret than starting from scratch.
You know, sonically, it's sort of dialing in the right sounds to match with an orchestra. Is that something that you need to be... Was that something that was a challenge, where you were going, actually, this doesn't blend that well, I need to take certain frequencies off or use certain pieces of gear, or does it just fit together nice?
Well, you know, when you're doing 40-piece orchestra, this is the first time we did it, and the only time we've done it was at the Hollywood Bowl a few years ago. We practiced with Jeff Bova. Jeff Bova, who is a wonderful composer and string arranger and a complete legend himself. He was nice enough to come out of hiding, because he never tours anymore. But he came out and he did 3 weeks of touring with us, and he had the Bova Orchestra with him, which was a series of keyboards and sounds, and he was reading the charts and filling in the strings and some of the hits. So we got used to it. Now, he also was plugged in. We play loud as hell. So when we tried to adapt that to an orchestra setting, it was challenging. And, you know, initially it was like, well, we need to strip the amps back, and you just need to use a little amp. And finally I just said, this is a guitar show. And the compromise is going to be like, my guitar rig does not live on stage. It has to go to the side, and this way it gives, you know, like the audio people a fighting chance to be able to mic cellos, because they're not plugged in, they're mic'd. And, you know, so we have a protocol, we have a baseline of operation where I think it will be, you know, a lot easier to just kind of fall back into that.
Awesome. Now, every time you go out on tour, big part of the show, of course, is what guitars are going to make it with you. And on this particular one, I mean, you've been taking this fantastic Strat Bonnie out with you as well. What's the story behind this guitar?
I've had that guitar for years, I think 15 years. And I bought it from my friend Trevor Boone at Emerald City Guitars. He calls me and he goes, I have the coolest, vibiest 55 Strat you've ever seen. I said, wow, that's a big statement. And he goes, I'll send it to you if you like it. And he sends it to me, and I plug it in, and it just has, that particular guitar has an extra 5%. I don't know what's going on with that thing, but it just has an extra 5%. And I've used it. And the reason why it's called Bonnie is because when Josh and I and Paulie Serra produced Reese's record in 2017. We had Bonnie Bramlett, the legendary. She's amazing. She came in and sang on Reese's record, and she brought her guitar. I think she calls it Trigger or something like that. And it's this old, I believe, Yamaha guitar from the 70s that she had everybody who she'd ever kind of hung out with back then, and everybody had carved their name into the guitar with a knife. Now, I've signed my share of guitars with Sharpie and pen, but it's very difficult to carve your name into a guitar. Jimmy Hall, having the best penmanship with a knife, his signature was amazing. But everyone from Jerry Garcia to and I'm like, Bonnie, I don't want to sign this. Look at this. This is history. She goes, no, I want you to sign it. And I'm like, who am I to say no to Bonnie Bramlett, and who am I to say no, to a woman with a knife? So I carved my name in this damn thing, and a few months later, Bonnie came in and sat in our gig, and we played Well, the old Delaney and Bonnie song, and she came and killed it. And I said, man, I want her to sign something. So I texted her. I said, hey, bring a Dremel. She goes, oh, I got it. She loves the woodworking, I guess. And she brought a Dremel, and I was going to have her sign something, one of my guitars. And I'm like, well, what guitar am I going to have her sign? So I just grabbed this Strat. And I have video of it. She's in the backstage, and you could hear the Dremel. It sounds like you're getting a root canal. The high and she's just sitting there, and she beautifully carves her name and the date in the back of it.
And of course, you can see on your Instagram, and you've got some great shots.
And it's forever to be known as the Bonnie Strat. And that one comes out, on occasion. I was just going through the guitars this year because we had to build 2 separate setups for Europe and the UK and then America, because it's leapfrogging and this thing is sometimes challenging. And I said, let's bring Bonnie out maybe for the last run, because between that and the Nocaster that I've been playing for the last 15 years, they're starting to wear out. They're 70-something years old, and they're starting to wear out. And those 2 guitars will probably be retired in the next couple of years, because they've definitely shucked their fair share of oysters, and you're looking at, there was thousands of gigs played on it before those 2 guitars, before I got them, and then I played a couple of thousand gigs on them. Of course. So it's like every once in a while, a guitar, even though in theory they will play forever, they let you know when they're done, when they're tired.
And the same thing about them letting you know. You play so many vintage instruments, people will bring them to the shows for you to try out and see if you want to take them. What's the big difference maker for you in terms of feeling like that's something that should be part of my collection and one that you'll pass on?
Well, it's, I've seen a lot of guitars come through, and I own a lot of guitars. Now it's not a question of like, do I need 6 of everything? No, I don't. So what I do is I try to fill gaps in my collection, like unicorns, things you don't see every day, things that, right now, most of the stuff I've been procuring in the last year, a year and a half, I look at it through a different lens that I did 5 or 6, 10 years ago. When I was putting together the collection, all I wanted was the cleanest, most preserved version that I could find, and I did that. And I learned that from Norman. Norman taught me about like being, always buy the best of the best, because those, as a collection, tend to hold their value the most. And I don't look at them as stocks, but you also, you don't want to lose money on stuff. And but now I look at it through a different lens, going, hey, I have a use for this. This will be cool to play live, and if it's beat up and it's been modified in a cool way, that's where your barometer has to be right on. If it's modified in a cool way, that takes a guitar that you would never do that to something now. You would never take a Telecaster, Blackguard Telecaster, and just jam a humbucker in the front to make it look like, you'd never do that. Or you could, but it's kind of, not advisable.
Well, there's more options.
There's more options.
Yeah,
you can buy a new guitar with a humbucker. But if it's already been done, then game on. And it's like, to me, it those kind of things I like, because it takes me back to when I first started collecting guitars when I was a kid. Started collecting guitars in around '89, so we're almost 40 years. And I was a kid, but back then, a Strat, a '60s Strat it was $1,000 or less, and nobody had problems, putting a humbucker in the back and making a Super Strat out of it, or because it wasn't like this. It wasn't like now where it's like a '60 Strat is $25,000. It's like as the value's gone up, people's adventurous side has absolutely curtailed, because the internet will tell you, it's like it's like, are the solder joints original, or is this? It's like, yeah, that's important when you're dealing with a mint one, but when it's all beat up, nobody cares.
Absolutely. And obviously Rosie, was what, like a 72 or something like that?
Rosie was a 71, and I took the paint off of it in 1990. I stripped the candy apple red off because I wanted a natural one, like Lowell George. And then I never thought...
Who took the paint off?
I did.
You actually did that? Because
I had a Dunlop
capo. You did a great job.
I had a Dunlop capo that had a little edge to it. And I didn't use paint thinner. I just scraped. It was all beat up anyway, so I just scraped it off. Yeah. And it came off, and all these little paint flakes came off on it. And it was probably a rare guitar, but then I had B.B. King sign it and Buddy Guy sign it. And that was my guitar, but it was also $275.
But your first 50s guitar, though, right? So you got like a 54 when you were like 14.
With my great grandmother's savings bonds.
That's
that was a lot of money. For the 54 hardtail that I bought originally, that was $3,800, which was all the money. You're like, wow, I can't believe I paid almost $4,000.
But for a 14-year-old, that's a big decision. And also, as you've talked about there a little bit, the market wasn't the same then for it. So what? No,
a Sunburst Les Paul was $10,000.
But what made you think at 14, like, I want vintage instruments?
Oh, between my father's love of them, the books at the time, you're talking about the Duchessois book, the Tom Wheeler book, the Bill Blackburn book, the Fender books and all that, like all those guitars, and you would just see these patinas on the neck, and you'd see Billy Gibbons with this Sunburst Les Paul. They don't make that anymore, do they? Okay. And then, dot neck 335s, and, I was hooked. I would go through these books and just idolize these things because I just thought they were so cool. And it was completely not what was happening in the late 80s. In the late 80s, it was pointy headstock guitars. It was Floyd Rose's Super Strats, and now those are starting to become very collectible. The San Dimas Charvels and the Pre-Pro, all that stuff. And because what you're seeing happen is the same thing that was happening at the beginning of the 90s into the 2000s with 50s and 60s guitars, is people became nostalgic for their old instruments again. They'd sold them off, and okay, now that I have a good job and the bills are paid and I have a little extra money, I want to buy my I had a candy apple red Strat when I was 16, and I want to buy it back. Next thing you know, everybody wakes up and says, hey, these are now collectible, which they weren't. There was a bit of a collectible market in the late 70s, early, through the 80s, but that was kind of relegated to the people that knew and were, Gruen was one of the founding fathers, sure. George Gruen, Norm Harris, my friend Norman. There was a few other ones, Ed Seelig, that were like the OG people. Even Rick Nielsen was helping from Cheap Trick, helping people like Jeff Beck find Sunburst Les Pauls. Joe Walsh sold Jimmy Page the number one because they had access to him. And over here, these were these mythical creatures. I have a 1960 Sunburst downstairs from where we're sitting that was purchased in 1967 for 50 pounds out of Melody Maker magazine by a gentleman who saw Cream and wanted a Sunburst Les Paul, and then next thing you know, it popped up. And the family didn't realize what it was. They thought it was worth like 5,000 pounds. And then Mike from ATB Guitars told them that it probably will surpass the 5,000 pound mark. And, you know, when I got the guitar, I told Mike, you know, because the frets were roached and it was kind of unplayable. It sat for 50 years. And when he said, you know, we're going to restore it, I said, just bring me the whole mess. I'll do it. because, you know, we did so little to get that thing up and running. It was a refret and just a general once over that you don't have to restore everything. And you just get it up and running.
Absolutely.
And it's cranky, but whatever. So am I.
Now, earlier in the year, Gibson launched a 70th anniversary version of the Les Paul Custom that had 5, I think, very rare colours that they had launched at the 55 version of the NAMM show.
Oh, you're talking about the standard.
That's it. Now,
those are standards, not customs, but they're standards, yeah.
There were standards. I understand that one of the colours, though, it was from a guitar that you had that they'd forgotten that they actually used that colour. Is that right?
Well, it was. This is where sometimes is the deeper you. I have 2, both built in 1955. Originally, we all kind of between Gibson and myself, and just, you know, having that ledger entry. There was Samoan beige, black. I think there was a white one. I don't think there was a black one. Samoan beige, white, some other gold that wasn't, you know, standard gold, Viceroy brown, and copper iridescent. Okay, so we had surmised that what I was holding, the 2 that I had found, one was a Gibson employee guitar, and one ended up in Yuma, Arizona, but it also came from Minneapolis. So both of my original guitars originated in Minnesota, which makes sense because regionally, that's where Gibson would send their stuff to. Like it would, you know, Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, Iowa, you know, all that stuff was around. Just like Leo would send a lot of his stuff through Fullerton and California and Arizona. So you see all this Fender stuff on the West Coast. Gibson was more Midwest, East Coast. So I was calling it copper iridescent, so much so that my Epiphone, based on that guitar that came out a year and a half ago, was called the Joe B Copper Iridescent. Cut to Matt Kaler, my friend, almost 20 years, does the deep dive because they were going to reissue this set of 5 with the matching knobs, and they started doing the deep dive of what copper iridescent really looked like, and, you know, going into the old Mopar Dodge archives and finding this color. It turns out that my 2 guitars are not copper iridescent, they're Viceroy brown. And so now I have Viceroy brown, but still rare. Any custom color Les Paul standard from the 50s is really, you know, borderline unobtainium. Now I have a black standard from 1960, which is probably one of 5, 6 in existence. Kirk Hammett has a black one. My friend Joe in New York has the Sweet Cherry. There's, I believe, another cherry one floating around. So they didn't make a lot of solid colors, but they did make these for the NAMM show in Chicago in '55, and that's part of my collection. And I actually have 3 of them. I have one from '72, which is the same color, which tells me it was standardized. There was the 2 that I have, and then one popped up in Minneapolis again with a broken headstock, same color. So now there's 3.
So do you find at this point, you know, obviously fantastic musician, incredible albums, great player, but you're also like a guitar historian. I mean, you're actually helping some of the guitar brands and filling in the gaps.
Well, you fill in the gaps, and you fill in in information sometimes gets corrupted, you know, with, you know, people, generational changes. And it's important to understand how the process of these things were, you know, like, it's like if you get an old Fender Strat or Telecaster from the 50s in a solid color, and it's the finish is wonky, and somebody uses the excuse, well, they were hand-built guitars, and they, it's like, no, they were built in factories. They have factory standards, factory contours, factory everything. They weren't, like Leo would, like I have the first black Strat. That was a that was a custom order through McCord's Music for a guy named Howard Reed, who briefly did a stint in Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps. Well, I have a picture of Howard playing it with Gene Vincent in the Blue Caps in black and white. There's no doubting what that thing is. Where the information gets murky is when speculation meets hope, and hope means money. And that's when you can get into trouble. Provenance is 95% when you're dealing with unicorn guitars. Provenance is so important, especially when you're talking about Carina stuff, when you're talking about any kind of custom color, anything you want that provenance locked up tight.
Good. Copies and all that are just getting better and better, aren't they?
Well, no, yes, but a lot of people weren't around in the business when some of the great refinishers started in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And those finishes are now 35 years old. So you got to know. And you got to, there's a few tells, which I will not reveal at Guitar Interactive, because then they get better at faking.
Yep, absolutely. That makes sense.
But if it was me, and I would always say this to any guitar collector, if you are not sure and it doesn't give you the warm and fuzzies, just pass on it.
Let me ask you about two more old guitars, because we need to talk about this new album because it's fantastic. I've not even brought it up yet, but I'm not asking you to talk money. But with Greenie, why did you pass?
Why did I pass? It wasn't for me. Guitars let you know when they're for you, and to be honest with you, I, truth be told, think that guitar ended up in 1,000%, without a doubt, with the person who loves it the most, and that means more than anything else. Now, you're not going to find a bigger Peter Green fan than me, and you're not going to find a bigger Gary Moore fan than me. But at the time, how it was being presented to me was not the way I would want to remember that.
Do you like how it played?
It was fine. It was a Les Paul, and it quacked in the middle. But give me 5 minutes and a screwdriver, I can make any Les Paul quack. You just
fair enough.
Flip the magnet, it's quacking. But that's the one, but the fact that the narrative of it's like when it first was known that who the new owner is, like Frank Kirk was amazing guitar player. Don't need to say any more. It was like, well, that guitar needs to play blues. It's like, in what book does it say that these guitars have to play blues?
Some people would want them behind glass rather than out there,
Well, there's some of that. I mean, there are certain things that don't have to be beat up on the road. There's just certain guitars. I mean, I have hundreds and hundreds. 90% of my collection is guitars that are so well preserved. Not a screw has been changed, tagged up, photos of the guy, or the original owner. All the great story, great provenance. Now, I don't need to take that out here at the Brighton Center and beat the hell out of these things.
Yeah.
Those things should be preserved and played in more of a controlled environment. Studios, great, blah, blah, blah. But when you're talking battle conditions, frets are important. Sometimes, I've had pieces of Sunburst Les Paul just fall off. Screws fall out. It's like, okay, well, that's what happens when they're traveling every day.
Yeah.
And so those don't need to be, beat down. And I've known people that just get a mint guitar and a big fat belt buckle and go, it's my guitar. Next thing you know, what the hell happened to this thing? There's no right or wrong.
For sure.
And, they are important pieces of history, but they're only important because of who played them and the songs that were written on them. And that's the most important part about guitar collecting. The only reason why, I love Sunburst 50 Strats is because I just thought those pictures of Buddy Holly were the coolest. you know? And then you'd see like Anson Thunderbird playing one. You're like, that's so cool. And I was lucky to come up in the 80s and 90s when people were still in clubs playing old guitars because they weren't valuable.
Absolutely.
It's hard to find that now. It's hard to find someone who drags an old guitar, you know, out to a club gig. You know, I have no problem with it.
You get back with a brand new album. We've had to wait a couple of years, but Breakthrough is finally here now. I understand there's quite a few additional tracks that you recorded. 10 on the record.
I think there's 18 total, which eventually will probably, after I'm dead, come out. But we started that in 2023 in Santorini. Kevin and I went to Santorini and we started with that album, and then we did a session in Los Angeles and we did a session in Nashville, and we just kind of pieced it together over the course of a couple of years, and then next thing I know, it's like, oh, we're putting the album out. I'm like, okay, and then there we are. The reaction's been pretty good so far, you know, and we definitely need to revisit those songs. And, you know, for the fall, get a couple in for the live show because it is a new album.
Absolutely, because it feels like there's like even some little bits of country influence, and you're going in slightly different directions with some of the songs.
Some of the songs, yeah, but it's like, you know, and then you interpret that stuff live and it all just comes out like, you know. We've made enough blues rock sludge over the years. So, you know, melodic content we kind of concentrated on and it's I've always flirted with the Americana thing, but then you know, then you fire up and then there's a big fat guitar solo. So that's, you know, some of the studio versions don't have guitar solos at all, which either we forgot to put one on there or didn't care.
Final thing, Joe. I know you need to get to the stage. Memories of playing Lucille.
Well, which one? I mean, BB he traveled with two. I have one of his old ones, and he signed it for me. And they were stock up until they started putting custom fingerboards on them. They were pretty much stock Lucille's. And, you know, BB had a lot of Lucille's. He had those iconic ones, the Argentine gray dot neck with the Veritone. That's a unicorn, just as a guitar. But that's the live at the Regal guitar. And then he played the walnut ones, you know, in the 70s when he went to Zaire, you know, Rumble in the Jungle era, you know, with the Crusaders. And then he played some red ones. And then he got his signature model in the late 70s. Those date back to like 78, 79, when they took the F-holes out and they just made a solid 355. And that was what he played till the very end. And then he would vacillate between rented amps, you know, or backline that the opening act would supply, like we did in the 90 when I first met him. It was our backline. They just showed up and was like, hey, you know, they would spec backline for some of these flying gigs. And BB used my twin the first time I met him. And then he started carrying, shortly after that, he started carrying a Lab series, L5, and that was pretty much his main amp for forever.
Amazing. Look, Joe, appreciate you taking the time again.
No problem. You know more about my guitars than I do.
Well, look, have a great show tonight, and
thanks.
And congratulations on the new album.
Thanks. I wish I knew more about it.